Perfect. So thank you all for joining us today. We are going to be spending our St. Patrick's Day talking about ash trees, specifically which ash trees we find here in Kentucky. And then, of course, we're going to talk a little bit more in depth on the emerald ash borer, which is an invasive insect species that unfortunately is devastating our ashes across the Commonwealth. So let's do a deep dive into this. So as I've started out our previous tree presentations, these are just some wonderful resources that if you wanted to learn about the native trees found here in Kentucky, as well as some great field guides or booklets, then this is your list of all those references. So I always like to begin my talks and really kind of do a deep dive into the genus, the family. And so let's talk about what are ash trees in general, what defines an ash tree. And so specifically the ashes we are talking about are in the genus Fraxinus, which is in the olive family. So if you kind of see similar characteristics with these trees and other members of the olive family, that's because they are related. So we have about 65 species of shrubs and family, and they, not specific to Kentucky, we've got 3 ash species we're going to talk about specifically in Kentucky. But as a whole, there's about 65 different types ranging from trees and shrubs, primarily native to temperate regions of the world. Now, one of our kind of more common characteristics that we see is most of our ash trees have an opposite leaf arrangement, and then they have compound leaves, specifically compound pinnate leaves, where you have those leaflets that are found. So when it comes to the actual seed fruiting structure, so these are samaras, kind of similar to what we think with our maple trees, but these are actually one seeded, one winged, even flattened, and you can kind of see a representative here in the picture, the bottom picture of what these seed pods look like. Now, kind of as I had just mentioned, we have 3 ash species that we're going to specifically talk about today. Now, with that said, we're talking about the 3 main ashes that we see across the state. There could be other ashes like the black ash, which is found in the northeastern part of the US. I don't believe that's technically native to Kentucky, but we may have it or have had it in our landscapes. And then also the tree that we call the mountain ash, even though in its common name it's referred to as an ash, it's actually not a true ash species. And so we're not going to talk about that today. So really, there's just going to be 3 representatives that we talk about in this lecture. So I kind of brought this up with the previous presentations as well. And so I want to do this with ash trees. And so what are the economical, what are the ecological importance? Well, economically, it is pretty substantial. This is a dense hardwood tree that we have used in quite a few different things, anything from furniture to making tool handles. We use this in musical instruments, like with our guitars. But you all, especially being from Kentucky, may know ash from sports equipment. So specifically, ash is used in the making of baseball bats, very commonly up in Louisville. With the Louisville Slugger Museum. So there's a little bit of history there. And so really this hardwood was essential and still is to a point with the construction of these different materials. Now, also, prior to emerald ash borer, the insect that we're going to talk about later, this was a great landscape tree, a very desired landscape tree, and honestly, one that did relatively well in urban environments and urban settings. It was very commonly used as a street tree in suburbs. And so, there was quite a few planted, over the span of the last century. And so, unfortunately, with this invasive species that we're going to talk about, just completely devastating all of these landscape trees to the point where now we can't even recommend it anymore as a landscape plant, as a landscape tree itself. So that's very unfortunate. But at one time, it was very common in the nursery trade to be used in landscaping. Also for ecological importance, so very much the same with a lot of our other tree species. The seed pods are eaten. The seeds themselves are eaten by many different bird and mammal species. The bark is eaten by a lot of our mammals, our beavers, our rabbits. Commonly, these trees are browsed by deer for good or bad, whenever we think of deer browsing, but deer do use it quite a bit as a food source. But then also for our insect population, it's a very important host plant for our butterfly and moth species. A lot of the caterpillars themselves will feed on these trees as their host tree. So just to give a few examples, that first butterfly picture you see is of the mourning cloak, and then you've got the tiger swallowtail butterfly. So both of these are reliant on the ash tree to complete their life cycle, for them to lay their eggs on the tree, and for the caterpillar itself to feast on the tree. All right. So the first ash that we are going to focus on is the blue ash. And this one is very easy to identify, especially if you look at its scientific name. So its scientific name is Fraxinus quadrangulata. And if you think of quadrangulata, if you look specifically at the stems, and you can kind of see that with the top picture here, it has a square stem, a four-angled stem that has kind of these little ridges on it. And so a lot of times when we think of square stems, we think of the Lamiaceae family, the mint family. But in this case, this is an ash tree that has a square stem, unlike other species. So you can easily identify the tree, especially if you are up close to it, by its square stems. So that's kind of where it gets its scientific name from. So this is an ash tree that we find all across Kentucky, and it's found primarily in our limestone outcrops. So it kind of prefers a little bit of that alkaline soil more so than acidic. And it's going to prefer more full sun conditions, moist and well draining soil. This is a moderately fast grower, and about medium size for a tree, going to get anywhere from 50 to 70 feet tall. Now is something we'll talk about with the emerald ash borer. A lot of times these ash trees aren't going to probably make it to full maturity, or not for very long anyway. So they may not necessarily reach its full potential, but they can get that tall. And usually, whenever they're mature, they're going to get more of this kind of oval rounded crown. The leaves themselves, as we talked about, are kind of that opposite pinnately compound leaf, anywhere from 5 to 11 leaflets. Usually they're about oval to lanceolate in shape, and they have serrated edges. So again, kind of that top picture, you can see a little bit of the serrated edges on those leaves. And something else you'll notice with ash trees, they do have some nice fall color. Generally, they may have a yellow fall color. So with the blue ash, those leaflets are going to change to yellow. So that's very colorful and also another good indicator. Because I think sometimes people have trouble mistaking ash trees for other trees with compound leaves. Like, a lot of our nut trees have compound leaves, so they may mistake it for that. Um, but with other characteristics to help you distinguish with it, for the blue ash specifically, these do have tiny purple flowers. They're actually a bisexual flower that has the male and female reproductive parts. They are what we refer to as apetalous, meaning they don't have petals. And so everything that you're seeing here are actually the reproductive structures. And so these little purple flowers are going to be on what we call these loose panicles. And they are going to be coming out when the leaves are starting to emerge. So you can kind of see in this bottom picture here, a little bit of those leaf buds starting to form. After those flowers are fertilized, they're going to give way to those winged samaras. And those are going to hang in clusters, and then they are going to be taken by the wind, but then also feasted on by birds and other mammal species. So an interesting characteristic too with the blue ash specifically, why it's also called the blue ash as its common name, is if you look at its internal bark, its inner bark, it has this kind of jelly-like substance that whenever it's exposed to the air, it kind of becomes more of a blue color. And actually that was used as a blue dye, very commonly used as a blue dye to even color yarn. And so, it also served a purpose there. So that's another reason that it gets its common name from. But even beyond the blue dye, the wood for blue ash was used commonly in the making of different tool handles. And this was cultivated in the 1800s to be used as a landscape ornamental as well. So that is the blue ash. Then we're going to get into the green ash. You'll see this trend, right, of the different colors of ashes. So we're talking about blue, green, and then we're going to talk about the white ash. Okay, so specifically the green ash, Fraxinus pennsylvanica. This is going to be found more in our bottomlands and swamps of Kentucky. It's found in more full sun and kind of moist environmental conditions. This has more of a pyramidal shape when it's young, and then will develop more of that rounded oval shape when it's mature. Now, this ash is a little bit more wild in kind of growth appearance. That especially when it was used as an ornamental, a lot of times it could not quite be the form that people preferred. And so a lot of times early on, while it was still a young tree, people would prune it to kind of correct for kind of that poor growth habit, if you will, that poor posture in a way. But also, this does tend to lose branches easily, kind of has more of those weak branches. And so that was also used as a technique to correct for that too. This is a more fast-growing ash species, and it gets about 50 to 60 feet tall. Again, has those compound leaf structure, about 5 to 9 leaflets that are ovate to lanceoliptic in shape. You can kind of see that with the top image here. It usually is generally dark green with kind of the silky underside, silky and kind of a paler green underside. And then, of course, in the fall, it gets that lovely fall yellow color that ash trees typically get. Now, the flowers actually differ on the green ash compared to the blue ash. So the green ash is actually dioecious. And so we've got separate male and female flowers on different trees. so different clusters. And so their coloration is going to vary from light green to purple. But if the female flowers do get fertilized from the male pollen, they will again produce those single winged seed pods. So we do typically see that. But of course, it's got to have a male tree near it in order to be properly fertilized. So when it comes to other distinguishing features with green ash, you can kind of tell based on the bark, especially as it matures. So the bark has these crisscrossing ridges that form these beautiful diamond patterns. So if you see that kind of gorgeous diamond pattern along with the compound leaves, then that is also going to be kind of a helpful indicator for you that this is going to be a green ash tree. Now, this ash served multiple purposes. This has been used to make sports equipment, furniture, even used in wood floors and homes. The bark itself was even used as a thickener in cooking, as a thickener in cooking. And just kind of in general, again, when we talked about environmental purposes, very commonly eaten by small mammals and seeds eaten by birds and such, as well as being a host plant for the eastern swallowtail butterfly. All right, white ash. So this is Fraxinus americana. This is similar. It likes full sun, moist, well-draining soil found throughout Kentucky. It has more of a more open, rounded growth habit as it ages. Again, another medium-sized tree gets between 50 to 80 feet tall. Again, the bark is very noticeable with the white ash. It has more of a braided pattern. So it has kind of these furrowed ridges and it has this braiding pattern. So you can kind of see this top picture kind of shows that texture. Again, the 5 to 9 leaflets on the compound leaf, dark green generally, and it's going to, this one has a little bit more fall color than the others. It will start with some yellow coloration, but could even change to more of a purple to maroon leaf color. And it's going to have this whitish green underside. And then unlike the other ones, it has more of these smoother margins, if you will. Now this one also is what we consider dioecious, where the flowers are male and female flowers on separate plants. Also apetalous, does not have the petals. And again, the females are again producing the same types of seeds. Now, what's interesting with this tree in particular, again, we're in Kentucky, so I should mention that white ash was commonly used to make the Louisville Slugger baseball bat. So it came specifically from this species of tree. And with that, also, it was made from into different types of furniture and other equipment too. This also has served some ethnobotanical purposes where the juice that you can take from the leaves or kind of that almost like that secretion, if you will, can help with swelling and itching of mosquito bites or snake bites used by our indigenous cultures. They use that for those different purposes. So that's kind of a unique characteristic there. But then in addition, again, serving a lot of the same ecological purposes with helping our swallowtails, our mourning cloak butterflies, and our moss species with the insects. Okay. So those are the three ash trees. So we don't have a lot of ash, like diversity, if you will, in Kentucky. But we have those three common species. And so let's kind of do a little bit more of an in-depth topic of this bug, this insect that is plaguing these three ash trees. Okay. So we have the emerald ash borer, and a lot of times it goes by EAB. Um, so if you see that in publications, they just kind of have that acronym. But this is an insect that is not from the United States. It is native to Asia and has unfortunately spread and become very invasive. This is able to infest and kill all of our American ash species, so anything that belongs in that Fraxinus genus. So this affects green, white, and blue ash. So all the ones that we talked about. And it kills them because it is a wood-boring insect, meaning that the larvae kind of tunnel their way through the wood, through the tissue, and basically are eating the tree from the inside. That sounds awful to say, but it's true. So they kind of create these little serpentine tunnels under the bark, and they're destroying and eating up all of those necessary tissues that help to transfer nutrients and water from the roots to the rest of the plant. And so one of the things we'll talk about is you start to see canopy die back first, and that's kind of an indicator that you may have emerald ash borer. Unfortunately, infested trees can eventually die, especially if they are just heavily eaten up over and over again, because they're not be able to transfer those water and nutrients. Now, I should say, not all ash trees are created equal with like when it comes to like resistance or tolerance, if you will, with this insect. Generally, I'll say white and green ash are more susceptible, and they tend to die at about 7 to 10 years after they are infested with this insect. Blue ash itself, so the quadrangulata, tends to be, it's like resistant and tolerant is not really good words for this, but they tend to, I guess, handle the insect a little bit better in that they generally will live longer for a longer period of time after infestation. And so maybe not even the preferred ash species, if you will. And so you may have blue ash that can survive for a longer period of time rather than just the green and white ash itself. Again, the mountain ash that I talked about, that's not a true ash species. I think its genus is Sorbus. Sorbus americana, I think is the species. That is not a true ash, and so it's not impacted by the emerald ash borer. But I will say another tree that is affected by emerald ash borer that we do see is our native white fringe tree, which is actually closely related to our ash trees. So the white fringe tree is also a very nice ornamental, and it unfortunately can be susceptible to emerald ash borer. And so if there's no ash trees around, unfortunately, this borer may go to the white fringe tree too, is something that we've discovered recently. So if you have a white fringe tree, you kind of have to be on standby. You need to be watching to see if you see some of the signs that we're about to talk about. But with this emerald ash borer, it's a very vibrant, colorful insect, nice and kind of this iridescent green coloration. Um, Hard to see the adults really. Well, it's really more you're going to see the results of the larva feeding on the tree. But this is one of our more recent maps of our counties in Kentucky that have been infested with emerald ash borer. So this emerald ash borer has been across the East Coast for a long period of time. It's really plagued a lot of the northeastern US, a lot of the Appalachian areas, and it's now made its way into Kentucky, unfortunately. Um, and so the eastern half of the state kind of got emerald ash borer first, and it's slowly been making its way west. And so, as you can see here in Hopkins County, we have emerald ash borer. We found emerald ash borer here in Hopkins, I want to say maybe late 2010s into early 2020s. I can't remember exactly what year. For some reason, maybe 21 or 22 sticking out in my head, but it's been, I would say, in the last 5 years, we've um, found emerald ash borer specifically in Hopkins County. And as you can see, it's starting to affect our counties nearby. Even if a county is not on the map yet, it doesn't mean that it's not there. Emerald ash borer could very well be, especially in the Purchase region of Kentucky, and we just haven't had specific sightings yet. Um, but certainly, if you have ash trees in your woodlands, be checking on them for some of the things we're going to talk about to see if they might be plagued by the borer. I would say if you have woodlands where you have multiple ash trees, the emerald ash borer is going to go to there first because there's more food, right? So there's more trees for it to feast on. Whereas if you have maybe like a single ash specimen just in your landscape, it may not get plagued by the emerald ash borer for a long time because they're going to be less appealing to this insect. It's just going to see one tree and it's like, it's going to try to find um, a whole grouping of trees as its preference. So these are some symptoms, some early symptoms you may see on your ash trees. The first one being dieback in the tree canopy is going to be your indicator. Uh, Especially if you see about a third of the canopy dying back, then that's definitely a red flag. If you are also starting to see like more woodpeckers coming to your ash tree than before, or signs of woodpeckers, that could be that the woodpecker unfortunately is trying to get at the emerald ash borer larva that's inside of it. So that's another indicator. Also, if you start to see a lot of suckering or sprout growth at the bottom of your tree, um, that can also be the result of the actual tree itself starting to die off, and so you have suckers that are growing out from the base. So these are some of the other symptoms that you see and also what the larva looks like. So the emerald ash borer is a type of insect borer, a type of beetle. Um, and the larva itself, if you ever see it or if you ever were ever to cut open the tree when the larva was there, um, it's a very interesting larva. You can kind of see here like it's different, kind of more defined segments, if you will, and they will create internally these serpentine patterns. And of course, you're not going to really notice that, unless you cut the tree down or like you see quite a span of the bark removed from it. But it's this little flat-headed larva that's going to go through that cambium layer, that cambium tissue, and eat the tree on the inside. Now, where you're also going to see some other signs of this larva being in the tree other than just like the dieback of the tree itself is they do have these exit holes in the bark. And what's unique about emerald ash borer is those exit holes that you can notice at the top usually are more of a D shape. So actually looks like the letter D. And if you compare that to other insect borers, The other insect borers are generally kind of either larger or rounder or smaller and rounder, depending on the other type of beetle species. But with emerald ash borer, if you see that clearly defined D exit hole in the bark, that's your sign that there was larvae in there. So those are again some of your indications. And you know, it's not just going to be 1 year where the larva is feasting on your tree and then it's done. You know, again, they have a continual life cycle where you can have multiple generations of larvae that are feasting on this one tree, unfortunately. So let's kind of talk about that a little bit. So this is a kind of a 1 year life cycle where you have the larvae that are going to be feeding through the summer months before they're overwintering, and then they're going to be pupating um, into the spring, where the adults are then going to be merging late spring into early summer. They are going to breed, of course. The females are going to lay their eggs um, about 2 weeks after they emerge and they mate. Those eggs are going to hatch within a couple of weeks. Um, and also, I should note too, with the adults, they can feed. You can have some damage of the foliage from the adult beetle itself too. But the main damage is going to be due to the larva. So once the larva hatch from the eggs, they are going to bore into the tree tissue and they're going to eat it through the summer months into the fall and again over winter um, in the tree in that kind of outer bark layer. So this is kind of a generalized life cycle that you see. And so not saying you couldn't see the adults whenever they emerge, but again, most people aren't really paying attention, aren't really looking for the insect. They're going to be seeing the symptoms that are on the tree, the signs that are on the tree. So what can you do um, about emerald ash borer? And this is kind of a lot to take in. But I think it really is up to you. If you have a lot of ash in your woodland, they are not currently plagued by emerald ash borer, like they're very healthy specimens, then you may want to consider taking a preventative approach where we do have different systemic insecticides that you can use on the healthy trees to kind of prevent emerald ash borer from infecting them. So again, that's going to be like if you want to keep this grouping of trees, you know, alive and thriving, then that might be something to look into. Now, I will say, cost-wise, it's going to cost a pretty penny, especially if you're having a professional come out and make the application. So you kind of need to outweigh, you know, if the cost is worth trying to save the trees. Now, I will say also, if the tree is already infected with emerald ash borer, and especially if you've only got half or less than half the canopy left, there's really no point, unfortunately. I hate to say that tree is a lost cause, but that tree is more than likely a lost cause. And so that's when it really is not going to do any good to have these insecticide treatments. And if you have trees that are infected, but they're still in the early stages, again, you kind of have to weigh the pros and cons of if you want to spend the money to try to save the tree if it's already infected. A lot of times what people end up doing is knowing that this tree is going to potentially die within the next several years. They are going to go ahead and replace it, maybe plant another tree close by that's going to eventually take its place, not replace it with another ash tree. You don't want to do that. So that's the other thing too. You know, as long as there's emerald ash borer, you're going to risk the ash trees continually becoming infected. And so you probably need to consider choosing a different tree species at this point. And again, we really can't recommend ash trees anymore as landscape plants, even though they're a great native plant and one that does really well in more suburban environments. We just can't do it because this insect is really taken over. It's really caused a lot of astronomical damage, not just ecologically, but economically as well. And so, it's unfortunately something that we have to come to grips with, that we just aren't going to have the ash trees anymore. Or if we have ash trees, they're going to probably be young trees, young seedlings that are going to survive for a period of time, but may not make it to adulthood because they're going to become infected heavily by the emerald ash borer eventually. So the main thing is, just again, for the trees you do have that are healthy, do you want to take those preventative steps to control it? At this point, the emerald ash borer has been in the United States for many years. It's just increasing in population, and expanding in its reach. And unfortunately, something that again is kind of difficult to control. Um, and so, again, we kind of have to come to grips with this, in that we have to be looking at other plants, other trees. And so that's the unfortunate reality with a lot of our invasive insect species. We're dealing with that now with spotted lanternfly. Spotted lanternfly has been found in Kentucky, in kind of our northern Kentucky counties, and it's making its way. Even though spotted lanternfly feeds on the invasive tree of heaven, it can also feed on many other tree species too, which makes it a problem. So, I hate to sound all doom and gloom, but, it's definitely, we've seen this before with other tree species. We've seen this with our Dutch elm disease, our chestnut blight, whether it's insect or disease. We're seeing it with our hemlock species from the woolly adelgid. And so unfortunately, it's just there where we have these invasive insects and diseases that find their way into the United States on either shipping containers, or really that's generally where they're found, is through shipping containers, whether by boat or plane. And they unfortunately make their way into the US and are able to mate and breed and then just kind of expand. So, um, again, just kind of one of our current realities. But, with that being said, ash trees are gorgeous plants. And if you have them on your property, again, kind of be scouting them, be monitoring them for signs of the insect. And if you again decide to choose, if you want to try some of these insecticides as preventatives, then, maybe consider contacting either Department of Forestry at UK or Division of Forestry. And they can kind of help you with figuring out different treatment options, whether professionally done or if you can do it as a homeowner yourself. So, yeah, so that's kind of in a nutshell what we have going on with our ash trees. I really, even though, again, compared to like maples, we don't have as many ash tree species here in Kentucky, but I really wanted to go ahead and do this talk on ash trees for the few that we have, to talk about specifically this invasive insect that's going along with it. Um, so with that, I'm going to end the presentation for today. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to stop recording.